right. Welcome to Have Rods Will Travel. I'm Josh Dolan. With me is my good friend David Graham, and welcome to episode one of the Have Rods Will Travel podcast.
Welcome.
I think at this point, David and I are ready to scoop our brains out with a spoon by how challenging getting the podcast set up is becoming, but I think we're slowly figuring it out. It's just a challenge trying to record remotely. I'm in Virginia, he's in Florida, trying to get the best audio and the best video we can to put out there seems to be quite the challenge, but
Yeah.
I think we're managing. But anyway, David, yeah, I guess we'll just kind of jump into this thing. Today's episode we're going to be talking about Bowfin. It's kind of just our general topic of the day, and after that, we'll kind of jump into some other stuff. I'm sure we're going to kind of play this first episode loose, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. But David, you did a little fishing yesterday, so why don't we talk about that?
Yeah. Well, starting with bowfin's easy. I pretty much started with that fish as an angler, so that's a fun one. No, I mean, yesterday, it was actually the first time I've been out this year. I haven't been fishing since December 10th, so a lot of times when I go, well, for me, that's a long time to wait,
Yeah,
over a month before getting out.
sure.
But a lot of times, if it's been a while, bowfin have always kind of been that easy one to, that low hanging fruit fish that if I want to go out and just get a fix,
Mm-hmm.
I can usually pretty easily do that. But at the same time, being that we're working on the website that we're doing, I also was looking for opportunities to find material to write on.
Right.
And like the bowfin thing's been fun for me because I've written about them with bait. I've written about how to find them. I've written about how to find bigger ones. And now I wanted to write about how to catch them on lures and which lures to use and
Right.
those kind of approaches. So, but I don't have a lot of photos of the fish where it's clear how I got them. Like
Yeah.
in some of my older photos, I don't even remember. So I said, well, I'll go out and do a little bit of lure fishing for them. I don't do that a lot these days. I mean, at this point, I've been fishing for them for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've caught them on fly rods. I've caught them on lures. That's how I started catching them. But now it's like I'm kind of at that phase where it's like if I go after them, I only want to catch a really, really big one.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to catch a lot of them. I get kind of pestered and annoyed by catching big numbers of them. I only want the big ones. And, sometimes that putting a big chunk of meat on the bottom is just the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
That, and it's like, as you know, it's one of those games for bowfin. I don't even like doing it unless I'm sight fishing. But, pickers can't be choosers or beggars can't be choosers.
Right.
I can't pick when I'm going to go fishing or
Right.
what the conditions are going to be like because I've got a job. I gotta work with what I got. So,
Right.
man, it's been in the 80s all week. Nice, pleasant conditions. And then Thursday night, it rained. And then Friday, when I got up to go fishing, like it's a brisk 40 degrees. And for Southwest Florida, like that's it's a big swing.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wonderful. So I'm going to be dealing with overcast. There's a front come through. It's windy as all hell. So I was like, because I had wanted to go out and do like into some areas where I might be able to see fish
Yeah.
from the canoe. I was like, well, I'm not going out in the canoe in 20-mile-an-hour wind.
Yeah. That sucks.
So, but I kind of scoped out. There's this bank, this south bank that I really like fishing on the Caloosahatchee River here in Southwest Florida, where like there's chances to pick it apart from the canoe, but the wind was blowing out of the north. I was just going to be eating wind, getting blown against the bank. I'm like, man, I'm going to have to tuck into the creeks,
Right.
and change course here. But yeah, I don't know. I got lucky and I caught one fish. So, but it was one big fish. It was the one that I needed.
Right.
But
Well, I guess what we'll do, we'll talk about that individual catch, and then we'll talk about kind of bowfin in general.
Yeah.
And maybe since this is our second edition of trying to record this thing, we've recorded once already. We need to actually introduce ourselves, I imagine, and explain in case this is the first podcast or first edition of anybody ever finding our stuff. So we'll kind of bookend it with that, I think. But as far as that catch, I mean, I saw a picture of it, dude. It is ridiculous. 13 and a half pounds. That's ridiculous. I mean, we don't we have giants up here, but like something about the Florida fish, they're just jet black. Like ours are green and olive, and they got some color to them. Y'all's fish are in that tannic water, and they're just jet black, and they look like little like demons. Like
Yeah.
they're just crazy, man. And like ours get kind of thinned out most of the year, I'd say. Like right now, you catch a bowfin, it's probably pretty thick, but down there, it seems every single one that y'all catch has shoulders, and it's just this giant, angry looking thing that just kind of lurks on the bottom of these rivers. So, but before we jump into that, give us a little like of your background with bowfin, just kind of a Cliff Notes version of it. When you got started, what your PB was before yesterday, just kind of your history with the species, and let's kind of
Oh
jump
yeah.
into it.
Well, with regards to that fish, and a lot of people that know me know like my connection with that species. Like I'm not exaggerating when I say like my formation as an angler centers like very specifically
Mm-hmm.
around that species of fish. So prior to that, I mean, I was fishing a lot and going out. Probably around the age 10 is when I was like, going out with my brothers. And my origins as an angler is like everybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
Started pond hopping with my brothers, riding my bike. We lived on a golf course.
Right.
So we would just hop our fence and we'd either walk or ride our bike down to the 10th hole. There was this pond down there loaded with bass.
Right.
And I liked it. I mean, I was fun kind of, but for me it was just like I was that kid that was obsessed with reptiles and amphibians and creatures, and I was like always wanting, Steve Irwin was like my idol. So I was trying to mimic and mock what he was doing.
Right.
And so when my brothers went fishing, I could hop on the pegs of their bike and hold their shoulders and follow them, and they would fish, and I would just walk around the margins of the pond trying to catch stuff.
Right.
And then, as time progressed, I would do a little bit more fishing, and I had some fun with that. And we moved a lot when I was young. We moved like every 3-4 years. So, so like sort of isolated me from making lifelong friends. I became like something of a loner. Right. So when we moved to Arkansas, when I was like, I don't know, I was like 12, 13, maybe right when I turned 13. I wanted to it was like a continuation of that. But my oldest brother, Travis, had gone off to the University of Oklahoma. So I didn't really see him anymore. I couldn't follow him anymore. And then my older brother, Matt, he was in he was in high school. He didn't want to be hanging out with little old me.
Right.
So I'm like, damn. And so, I would just like find spots to go fishing and ask my like mom or my dad or whoever to drop me off there for a couple hours. And I found this little spillway, this little like swampy spillway in southwest Arkansas on this lake called Lake Columbia. And I was walking the banks of it fishing. I didn't know I'd gotten into fishing enough, but I wanted to explore, and I saw a dead one. I saw a dead bowfin. Right. In fact, I saw quite a few dead bowfin because, especially quite particularly in the South, it's, as it's scorned fish. It's bycatch. It's a trash fish. It's an undesirable fish. And this spillway was loaded with them. Now, but when I saw it, I knew what it was. I knew enough about different types of fish and different types of like animals that I was able to identify it because my brother Matt had like a South Carolina, like a freshwater fishes of South Carolina poster on his wall. And I always remembered how cool I thought the bowfin looked in the picture. I'd never seen one, but I knew what they looked like. And so when I saw the dead one, I'm like, oh my God, that's one of those bowfin things. Yeah. So that same day, all I had was one little Ziploc bag. It's so fun. My memory's so foggy on other fishing trips. I can't remember crap. But for whatever reason, I like vividly remember everything about that day. Yeah. And I had just a Ziploc baggie full of these neon red Zoom trick worms. That's all I brought. One bag. I banked all my success on this one worm and this one rod. Right. I was trying to catch bass. I was bass fishing. And I remember after I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh. Once I knew there was bowfin in there, I was like keyed in on it because, they kind of had that reptilian look. It's a fish. It was the best of both worlds that I was enjoying. And that same day, I think I hooked a few of them, but I kept losing them. They kept getting off. They were bending the hooks. They were just whooping my tail. I just wasn't prepared. I wasn't skilled enough. Right. And, but when I had that encounter, I knew like this is the fish I'm going to return for. And so I started fishing there heavily, and I got real heavily involved in like bowfin. I was so eaten up by them. Like from that day forward, it was like an addiction. And at the time, that was like during the heyday of the online forums and the message boards,
Yep.
which is a much purer and simpler and honest time, I think, with online social interactions around fishing, because people were sharing stories and sharing information and trying to help each other.
Yeah.
You couldn't find anything on Bowfin.
Mm-hmm.
And if you went to like a fishing forum about bass or something, asking about them, half the time people are like, what the hell's a Bowfin?
Or you get ran out of town. It's one or the other.
And they all called them Grinnell in Arkansas. That's Grinnell territory out there. They're called Grinnell there. But it was either you get dragged through the mud, or people don't know, or I don't know. You just couldn't find any information. Then I came across a Bowfin anglers group, which is now defunct.
Right.
And man, I just like cannonballed into that scene. I was like, they probably got annoyed by me. Like I was every day posting all over the forums, bombarding them with photos.
Yeah.
Like I was so excited to like get my photo onto the website. Like I thought I'd like made it to the big time. I thought that was a big deal.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. Then we ended up moving. So I was like all about Bowfin there. Then we moved to South Carolina, and we moved on to this lake called Lake Moultrie. Like we're living with my grandparents, and my grandparents had a lake house on Lake Moultrie, the Santee system. And I started finding them again there, except this is like a different caliber of fish, like the Bowfin that live there. I mean, South Carolina is the state, and a lot of people can contend that their area is the area, but like South Carolina, I feel like is like the lair of giants.
Well, that's where
the world record is.
Right.
Yeah,
I was about to ask that.
And the Santee system just produces giant fish in general. Like Santee Cooper Lake system's got, giant catfish, giant carp, giant bass, all the fish that live in there. There's like this perfect balance there, that all wildlife that has anything to do with the Santee system. The alligators there are the biggest ones you'll see anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, I guess the rest is history there. I've since fished for him South Carolina, then we moved back to Arkansas, and then I'd fished for him in Oklahoma. I fished for him in Texas. I fished for him in Louisiana. So it's Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, South Carolina, Florida, a half a dozen states,
Virginia,
more than a half. That's Virginia, 7 states.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's funny to see the differences, the little small differences here and there in the different states. But to your point, like the color variations is interesting. But
they just announced what this year or 2022, so it would have been just last year. But there's apparently 2 species of bowfin, or like a subspecies. I didn't really dive into it, nerd out like other people have, but that just kind of proves what we all sort of thought. I mean, the bowfin up north versus the bowfin down south look so different. It's hard to even imagine it being the same thing. So
right. Well, I had encountered them in Oklahoma and in Arkansas is where I would see. Now they're calling them. It's like they're both the amiform fish. So there's like Amia calva, which is I think the more southeastern side, and now it's Amia acilicata, I think they call it. I always wonder if I'm pronouncing it right. But I had long since said that. Like when I moved from Arkansas to South Carolina, I'm like, this is different.
Yeah.
Like they are different. Like I have caught thousands of these fish in like the Southeast. You will not see that neon chartreuse, like bright flared up green on the males ever. You get a faint green of like, the caudal fins or the pectoral fins, but not that neon blown out color. And then, so I don't know. I was always like, there's something different. Like you just don't see that here.
Yeah, that and just the overall size difference and everything. I mean, it's like comparing a Florida guard to a long nose or an alligator guard. It's like, this isn't the same thing. Like we're talking about a different species here. So that's super cool. What is the world record for him? It's 21 something, isn't it?
It's over 21 pounds. So like I've familiarized myself just geographically. So South Carolina's got a 21 pounder. Louisiana is 20 pounds, 5 ounces. And then like, I think Missouri, Mississippi, Florida, and Missouri each have one over 19. Alabama's is 18.6. Texas, Arkansas, and North Carolina's are all just below 18 pounds. And this is like, I don't care what anybody says. The southeastern United States is where the big ones live. It ain't the north.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like once you get up above certain states, it's, 16, 15.
Yeah. I would say probably North Carolina, South Carolina is where that line sort of lies, because
Yeah.
ours is like 16 pounds and some change. And there's not a lot that are getting caught anywhere close to that up here. I mean, that is
Mhm.
our 20 pounder. That you're not seeing that same caliber of fish, but I don't know. It's crazy to
Right.
see like what they can become if they have the right, conditions. But
Yeah. Well, every time when I see those numbers, like my biggest is the one that I just caught, just over 13 pounds. And like when I hauled that thing out of the water, I'm like, oh, mother of God,
yeah,
look at this monster. And to think that it's still like almost,
a full
the world
other
record,
fish. Yeah,
that I have a hard time picturing an animal like that,
yeah.
which is funny, but I don't know.
When and what was your previous PB and where'd you get it from?
The previous one was from Lake Moultrie,
Okay.
and it was right between 32 and 33 inches. That one could have been, I think, a teener. So my thing is, like, the big thing with me is I started catching them when I was 13. I'm 36 now.
Yeah.
So in that period of time, like, I would consider myself a bowfin angler the entire time,
Right.
not a guy that caught one when he was 13. Like, I have dedicated untold hours and time specifically trying to catch them.
Right.
But for all those years, I could not get over that 13 pound mark. I just couldn't do it. I've seen the fish. I've hooked the fish. I've like encountered that next level up fish. So but it was I have caught a lot of them that were between 12 and 13 pounds, like over 12-pound fish. I've probably caught 15 of them.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it. So that one, I was like a post spawn female. I think she was real thinned out.
What'd you get it on?
I caught that one on Zoom. It was like a fluke. So that one was on an artificial lure as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing a consistency here. Both of your bigger fish are on.
Yeah, I did a lot more sight fishing on Lake Moultrie. So it's a little bit different. On Lake Moultrie, I very seldom used bait. Actually, I did a lot more lure fishing because it's like Lake Moultrie is a notorious sight fishing lake. Like, I mean, even the tournament bass anglers, a lot of them will fish the whole tournament sight fishing because you have these massive expansions of stumpy flats. You just read the wind pattern and fish the side of the lake that's not been wind blowing the whole time. And you can fish around 2 feet of water, lily pads, weeds, and it's nice. The good thing there is nice sandy, like firm sandy bottom, so you can see the bowfin clear as day, like it when they're crossing over that. So I did a lot of sight fishing with lures when I was in Lake Moultrie. Since coming to Florida, I don't really, the opportunities just aren't there as much to sight fishing because our water's so black. I don't know. It's just harder to find them like that, and I just don't care to do that. I only wanted to get over that like 13-pound mark. So I go out just with spreads, bait fishing in the areas where I know the big females are going to be.
Right. I gotcha. That's legit, dude. I don't know. We almost exclusively have to fish with artificial up here just because of our blue cat problem. I mean, you and I've talked about it ad nauseum, but you can't put a bait on the bottom up here longer than 5 minutes without a blue cat hitting it. So it's kind of exclusively lure fishing up here for him. But
well, it's a good thing to talk about, like the bait versus artificial thing. It's that argument that classic ageless argument. So I would argue that bait fishing is as challenging, and this is going to sound crazy, and this is going to ruffle some feathers. Bait fishing for bowfin is as difficult as lure fishing is.
Yeah,
just for different reasons. So I relate it to like this. It's different in that you may be more likely to get the bite if your bait is in front of the fish. And even that's arguable because I would argue that as opportunistic as a bowfin is, it doesn't matter what the lure is. If you can find them and get a lure in front of their face, you're probably going to get a bite. But the difference that I find is you can't be very confident fishing for bowfin if you can't see them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even the lure guys that specifically fish for bowfin will say it's like the actually seasoned bowfin anglers say it's all a visual game.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, why aren't you blind fishing for them? Well, because it's harder.
Yeah.
Well, so is bait fishing for them. And I relate it to when you're lure fishing, you are actively engaged in the process. Like you're so focused, you're moving, and it's difficult more, I think, physically than it is mentally. So physically, you're engaged in a process, you're working, you're moving, you're staying like engaged in like what's next, what features am I looking for. So it's mentally taxing, but it's also kind of like if you're working hard at work, your day goes by faster.
Right, right.
If you're doing a boring job at work, it's long, it's boring. And I could look at it too like this. Let's say you go to a movie theater and you're watching a really dynamic movie and it's a visual experience and there's a plot and then there's characters and there's drama and there's things that you got to pay attention to so you can puzzle the movie together and understand it. And, before you know it, you've just enjoyed this great thing. Okay, now go to a movie theater and stare at a blank screen for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And see where your mind goes.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing when you're bait fishing. You sit on a bank, you're casting hope, and you're alone with your thoughts.
Yeah.
And so the ability to be self-disciplined enough to focus on when the bite's going to come is hard. It comes when you're not ready.
Yeah.
You start second guessing. Am I in the right spot? Maybe if I just go around that corner, I'll catch them. And a lot of times I've had days like that where I was really fighting that internal struggle, wondering, am I in the right spot before that giant came? So it's a different kind of challenge. It's an interesting debate, but I don't know.
I would say all of that is true. And I would also say if the world record ever gets broken or even in any of these individual state records, your chance of hooking one and keeping it hooked is much better on like a cut bait or a live bait than it is casting gear like that. Like Grant and I just had a conversation the other day separately. We're doing a separate podcast and we were talking about Bowfin then. And he mentioned that he thinks the next Virginia state record will probably be caught by a cat fisherman, somebody fishing for blue cats. And it makes sense because all your gear's heavier, your line's heavier. You're using circle hooks. They're not going to throw it. When we're lure fishing for them, we're using basically bass gear, and 9 times out of 10, these fish absolutely wreck whatever they hit. And then you're in, a serious battle with a fish that doesn't want to be caught. So but on the flip side of that is, at least for us, you're bait fishing, you're dealing with every other species that wants to eat that bait. Yeah. You're not doing that active hunting. It's
and that's another layer of what's going to be more challenging between lures and baits, because I don't have that issue. We got the turtles, like I've shown you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a problem. But up there, I'd venture to say it's easier to catch bowfin sight fishing with lures in Virginia than it is to go blind casting baits, because y'all ain't getting past them catfish.
Nah, yeah.
It just ain't happening.
There's nothing. It's a completely separate problem that has nothing to do with bowfin. There's just too many catfish up here. So yeah, each discipline has its own high points and low points and pros and cons and all that stuff. But
I don't know. I would think the next record would be maybe more likely still to come from a lure, only because think of how many lures are being cast right now as we speak. I mean, it's a game of opportunities, and there's bass anglers out there right now working a grassy flat somewhere with a lure that a bowfin is very happy to grab. There's not a lot of people out there sitting on a chunk bite in a swamp.
Yeah. That's
maybe a Cajun, and they're going to eat that world record.
Yeah. Well, I know as far as like Virginia's concerned, the Rappahannock, the James, I think probably the York, like these places that have these big blues, there's also certain areas that have giant bowfin. So it's hard to say where any one particular catch is going to come from, but you're definitely more likely to hook it when you're actively casting, but I don't think your chances of landing a 16 plus pound bowfin are terrible. I mean, I sent you a photo yesterday of that buzzbait for the Bowfin article that's going on our website. And that thing was all mangled up, and that's just from one fish. So
yeah, that's par for the course too. That is every time.
Yeah,
you get a 30-inch bowfin on a buzzbait, that buzzbait's gone.
Yeah, and the worst part is that was like a 7-pound fish. So double that and then some, and then you're going to end up with what's trouble.
I don't know if your experience is the same. And I was thinking about this the other day, because the fish that I caught Friday was a phenomenal bowfin. And great for photos. It was like one of the most exciting things for me, just on a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
But I hate to say it, I was a little underwhelmed by the fight by Bowfin standards.
Yeah.
By any other fish standards, it was still a marauder.
Right.
But I have kind of picked up on this pattern, especially like the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on, like, I have had a lot of success catching multiple 30-inch fish, but I've noticed I feel like that real sweet spot to get the most out of like a real war out of a bowfin is that
Mm-hmm.
7 to 10 pound range. The big ones don't like the big ones, just my experience, they're not coming out of the water. They're not
Yeah.
as dynamic.
I have a
Like this
take on
one,
this.
I was a little disappointed by the fight. And
Right.
honestly, so I hooked this fish. It was actually hilarious.
Mhm.
I hooked it, and then I was reeling slack as fast as I could. It
Mhm.
came right to the shore. It swam up onto the shore.
Yeah.
And it flopped around on the dirt and then swam back out, bulldogged for a couple of seconds. And that was it. There was no jumping. There was no death rolling. There was very little thrashing. It was a haphazard thing.
Yeah.
I have noticed that, though. I've kind of picked up on the bigger fish. They're more likely to shoulder down,
Mhm.
use a little bit of weight, and then, you overpower them and it's over.
I've had this take for a while now. There's a sweet spot. You have your small ones that are super energetic and but
Yeah.
they're easy to reel in. This is kind of goes for pretty much all fish species. I think there's a sweet spot where they're at their peak performance. You have the small ones that are super energetic and have the energy, but they don't have the weight behind them. And then you have the big ones
Mhm.
that have the weight behind them, but they got to carry that weight and they're not fighting as hard. You had that middle sweet spot is where you get those mid-range fish that have some weight to throw around and they have the energy to do so. Like a 100-pound blue cat, that thing's just gonna use its weight to its advantage. It's not gonna be peeling off 100 yards of line like maybe a 40-pounder would. It's interesting stuff. I think you're on to something there about that kind of mid-range size being really the ones that put up the best fight.
Yeah, with the bigger fish, it's usually just you've got that initial run where you need to keep them away from whatever the nearby
Mhm.
snag is, and then you're not getting as much the pure chaos. And there's some people that'd be like maybe in shock and all. I am the biggest bowfin proponent on planet Earth,
Mhm.
but I will sit here and say they don't play the power game that much. It's not an overwhelmingly like strenuously powerful fish. It is a fish that brings a level of chaos.
Yeah,
that's hard to
violence.
deal with.
Right.
And that's it. So when they're not bringing the dynamics of the death roll and the head shake and the direction changes, the jumping,
Mhm.
and they're just trying to lean on their power, it's like, okay, well, this isn't anything that I haven't, I don't know. I was a little disappointed in the fight, and the last couple like 30, 31 inchers with that had some mass to them.
Mhm.
I was like, they tried to play the power game with me and didn't really bring that pure hatred
Right.
that the little bit smaller ones always seem to bring.
Right. Sure. All right. Well, you've already kind of touched on it, but let's paint the picture like you're walking in, because I want us to do this because the series of text messages I got were pretty hilarious. Because
Yeah, right.
next to me, you said, I'm not going to catch shit today because it's cold. It was 80 degrees yesterday. It's 50 today. It's windy. It's miserable. I'm not going to catch anything today. And I didn't even have enough time to text you back. I was in Home Depot when you texted me. I was at work. I didn't have enough time to text you back before you're like, oh my God, just caught the biggest bowfin of my life. So
right.
You're walking in. What's your gear? What's your mindset? What's your plan? Where did you cast? Just paint the picture for the person watching or listening right now.
Sure. So the spot that I was fishing is a very tiny little area. There's a little roadside, it's a tributary of the Caloosahatchee River,
mm-hmm.
which is, I feel like, one of the most unique bodies of water in the entire state of Florida. So
mm-hmm.
like the Caloosahatchee River south of the Franklin locks
mm-hmm.
is, the next stop is the ocean.
Right.
So it's got an element of, it's got saltwater influence to it. So
mm-hmm.
south of the locks, you can get jack crevalle, tarpon, sharks, stingray, sawfish, side by side with largemouth bass, longnose gar, bowfin, bluegill. It's a very interesting arena, competitive arena for a freshwater fish to have to contend with.
Right.
But anyway, it's also been my observation that and a lot of people probably disagree with this as well, bowfin will be in tidal river systems that connect directly to the ocean, but I feel like
Mm-hmm.
they don't like the salinity that much. So the thing is, I feel like the Bowfin above the locks, and I've got some spots up there where they're monstrous.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually where I wanted to go. That was my original plan. But when they get below the locks, and it's interesting when you look on Google Maps at this place, you can see immediately to the east of the locks, like upriver toward this
Mm-hmm.
goes up towards Lake Okeechobee. You see you're seeing like lily pads, you're seeing water hyacinth, you're seeing like strictly freshwater plants.
Mm-hmm.
Right below the locks, like there's a very distinct change in the scenery. And I think that Bowfin that are coming through the locks, they're getting down there and not necessarily liking it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small handful of creeks just south of there that like little tributary feeder creeks that go in, and they're still tide affected creeks, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But I like, it's my theory. This is all speculative.
Right.
But I feel like the Bowfin come along, they're not traveling down the main channel of this massive river. They're traveling down the shoreline
Mm-hmm.
and finding their way into this creek, and they're finding a little bit the fresher water. But I've got a spot on this one creek where this is just right off the river.
Right.
So even though this is a creek, and you can probably tell from the photos, it's a narrow creek, but there's a couple of bends in it that are very, very deep water, like 15 at high tide, 20 feet deep holes.
Right.
And I have kind of noticed, because it's one of my bait fishing spots.
Right.
I use the bait to kind of find areas where I might be able to pick apart later with lures.
Mm-hmm.
The Bowfin love these holes. I knew, hey, this is a front that's come through. It's cold. The water's colder. The fish are probably going to retreat and hold in these isolated deep holes.
Mm-hmm.
It's also been my observation over 2 decades of fishing. The big females, while they'll be near shallow water, they want that access to deep water.
Yeah.
All the biggest ones I've ever caught have been either in deep water or right on the edge of it.
Deep water adjacent. Yeah.
Yep. So I got out there. This is like right off the road. There's like a little bridge. It's like one of my bait spots, and it's one little elbow, 190-degree turn in this creek. Other than that, the weeds become so thick, and the wood line becomes so thick you can't even walk.
Mm-hmm.
It was low enough, because it was like a low tide, that there was a muddy embankment that I could kind of straddle it and like ease along. But I knew I wasn't gonna be able to. I really wanted to pick apart this one hole because I fished there enough winters and enough colder periods that I know that the fish are there.
Right.
It's just one of those spots. So I kind of just devoted my attention to fishing there. And then I was like, if this doesn't work, I had the canoe on top of the Jeep. I was just going to launch it and then go to some of the other holes.
Right.
So I was working a little like crawl pattern, like a little creature bait, looks like a crawfish with like a little curly tail.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just wasn't doing anything fancy. I mean, I just told you, I'm like, this is blind casting into deep water. The fish might be there. They might not be there. I'm familiar enough with that spot to know there are fish in there. They're going to be in there. I know it. I just have to work it hard enough. So then I text you, and I was just in a bad mood. Like I had really wanted to fish this south bank on the river above the locks that I like. Much more dynamic area, a lot more features to work. There's this area of flats. It was right at a creek mouth. Anyway, I want to go back there soon. But so I text you. I'm like, man, I'm not going to catch anything. It's windy as all get out. As a front came through, they're probably going to be seized up. It was probably my second cast after I text you that I got the fish. So with them, I was doing a little bit of twitching, but it was more just slow rolling. Like I was literally casting and doing the most basic thing. I was casting this lure to the opposite bank. There's a bunch of fallen trees. It was the outside of the turn was the opposite bank. I was on the inside turn. So it's like a sloping. I was on where the slope is. Opposite bank is like a bore out deep hole where a bunch of timber, because, with these floods, especially the recent hurricane, there's all kinds of there's a log jam over there.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of timber to have to pick apart. So I could be there for 2 hours and not even hit the whole entire hole. Yeah. But I was just casting over there, letting the bait drop, and then slow reeling. There's no twitching. There's not really a lot of action. A lot of times on a hotter day, if I see the fish, I want to make movement because they'll go key in on the vibrations and stuff. But I was like, I just want to give these fish a chance to see the lure go by. I'm going to reel real slow. And so I I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a very intense bite either. It was just that sort of boom. So I felt that. And this is another area where more recent bowfin anglers will make this. There's a lot of myths about the fish. One that you'll read is that they're voracious predators. You'll see the word voracious. Like in most articles or most information, it says they're a voracious predator.
Yeah.
This is not true. They are an opportunistic predator.
Mm-hmm.
They're not actively seeking food at most points of the day. They're just going to take the easy meals sometimes. But it's also a very slow growing, long lived fish that can sustain itself on a very infrequent meals.
Yeah.
They can eat one meal and be good for 90 days. That's part of the reason they've lived so long.
Yeah.
So a voracious predator doesn't work that way. The voracious predators need to eat. They're eating, they're going, they're pursuing. This is the opposite. So anyway, the bite too. A lot of people will say when you set the hook on a bowfin, you have to set it with all your might. Just smash it. There's some truth to that, I think. But I have found that like you need a fine tipped hook, not a thick gauge. Like thick wire is going to be, if you have thick wire, sure, you're going to have to set it really hard because it's thicker to penetrate. Smaller hooks are going to bend at the tip. You just sacrifice a lot of hooks in this game. But I have found it's more of a slow, hard, sweeping motion. It's not boom. It's more like you feel the tension, you just go and you apply like a prolonged hard pull. And that's always worked for me. But when I hooked this thing, there was I mean, I knew it was a fish, but then it was like slack. And I could see the line, I'm using braided line. I could see that line floating and moving. So I knew the fish was coming at me. So then, like I described earlier, it was just reeling. It kind of sucked. I didn't get to a lot of fight out of it. It just swam directly at me.
That's hilarious.
But anyway, so I get the fish and got the photos and all that was awesome. The hook was shot. I mean, it was done. But I'd venture to say if I would have blasted it as hard as I could, it probably would have been worse. The hook was opened up. Yeah. But that was the only fish I caught. Yeah. I even launched the canoe. I picked apart other areas. I had a couple of questionable thumps that might have been fish, but
it's also that's kind of funny that you caught that fish that day, because my experience, like when you have a major swing in weather for the negative, a cooling like that, it's usually like, which it could be the complete opposite. But my experience is you catch the smaller ones, you don't catch the bigger ones, because the smaller ones kind of have to eat. Like they're still in that process where they're trying not to get eaten, so they're eating whenever they can. But the big ones can kind of pick and choose because it's not so hard for them. So it's interesting you caught a 13.5-pound bowfin on a kind of off day, more or less. But then, like you mentioned with the hooks too, it takes you got to use good hooks for these things, because you got to have a sharp point, because you have to penetrate, and it's got to penetrate bone. So you have to have a solid hook set. But then you also it's got to be strong enough to survive the fight. It doesn't matter if you get a hook in it if it comes, it bends out halfway through. So you're not going to get them with some cheap hooks. You got to have some, like your gear has to be stout. You have to have a stout rod. You have to have solid line, like 10-pound. 6 to 10-pound line isn't the game. Like you want some heavy braided line, and you want a stout hook. If you're going to use cut bait, circle hook's fine. But if you're going to use, buzz bait, like I love Booyah buzz baits for them. They don't have the best hook in the world, and you pretty much get one buzz bait per fish. So you have to kind of pick and choose what tackle. You want to use good enough tackles so you don't lose them, but you don't want too expensive to where it feels bad when you can't throw it again because it's destroyed. So just a lot of good points there. But yeah, man, that's a gnarly fish. If anybody wants to see photos of it, check out David's Instagram, Boundless Pursuit. He's got, do you have the photo of that bait and stuff up there too?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
It's pretty
and the aftermath of the hook. I mean, ideally, if I'm gonna be lure fishing, I'm like everybody else. I don't like blind casting for the fish.
Yeah.
And even in scenarios, and you probably observed this up in Virginia, there's times where, and people will say, if you just, they're voracious, they're opportunistic at times. I've also seen them to where you can be right on top of the fish
Mm-hmm.
and bounce a lure and, quite frankly, bounce a bait off their forehead.
Yep.
And I've always been curious what the difference maker is. The one thing I'll say is, if you find them sitting inanimate
Mm-hmm.
and you put a lure in front of their face and that dorsal fin stays idle, they're not eating.
Yeah.
If you can't get that thing to flutter, like as soon as I feel like that's like the precursor to a bite.
It's like a mood ring.
Yes. If you see a bowfin and you're moving a lure, if that dorsal moves, the bite's coming. But if it doesn't, no. So
that's a perfect segue, because we have a bunch of listener questions here that we posted the photo of your fish on the Have Rods HRWT Studios page, asked for questions for this podcast. And the first question we have from Dean Bishop from the Bowfin Underground Facebook page is, key factors for triggering a bite would be cool. So what scent, color, sound, what are you looking for if you're trying to get a bowfin to eat? Or do you have anything?
Well, I don't have. I feel like, again, it's one of those things I don't like making sound complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like the game of bowfin fishing is more finding them,
right,
and being proficient at locating them than it is drawing the bite.
Right.
Now, the thing with them is, I think it's a debatable thing, but the general consensus is that they have poor vision.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely don't seem like they use vision a lot, because their strike radius, the thing people need to understand is the strike radius is small. They won't normally move more than their own body length to go after something. It's like, if it's within range, yes, but they're a very curious fish,
right,
and very investigative fish. And if they hear a noise or they sense a vibration, or especially if they smell, they'll go and they'll search for it. But it's a slow search pattern. So if you're throwing, let's say, lures, I think speed is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this isn't I'm not speaking in absolutes here. I'm speaking in more often than not.
Right.
I don't personally like lures that require an unbroken retrieve, like a retrieve that's steady, because a lot of times you could be bringing that right past their face, and they notice it, but by the time they notice it, they don't want to. They're not going to pursue. They're not a fish that's really bombing after things. They will do it,
right,
but not more often than not. No, I like lures that have a lot of that make a lot of noise, vibration, flash. So bladed lures, like a spinnerbait, even though that is a lure that you'll move more steady, you can slow roll them. They do well through timber. They do well through snags. Spinner baits are really, really good bowfin baits because of the flash that they produce.
Right. It's funny. Okay. Before we started recording, you mentioned that if we could find a point of contention for the podcast to where we have some discourse back and forth, people might find that more interesting. And this is my point of contention. I feel my experience with bowfin is kind of the opposite of that. I've had bowfin come from 25 feet away to crush a bait. I think the louder it is, the more obnoxious it is. It just pisses that fish off and it wants to kill it. My experience with them is complete, which you have the 13.5 pounder, so you got the experience on me. But my experience with the fish is, if you can make them feel like they have the upper hand, then you're in good shape. So I like throwing buzz baits. I like that continuous, they can hear it coming and it's getting closer to them and they go, what the hell is that in my environment? And they just want to crush it. They swim at it like a U-boat torpedo and they try to crush and kill whatever it is. I think when you get a bowfin that doesn't want to eat, it's when it knows that it doesn't have the upper hand anymore. So like you were explaining, bouncing a bait on its head, I literally, one of these creeks that I was fishing for him, the fish is under me. I can see it, and I'm bouncing a fluke on its head, and it wants nothing to do with it because it knows, the jig is up. It knows I'm there. It doesn't want anything to do with it. So, I don't know. I just thought that was funny. You mentioned
I have said this to people that of all the states that I've fished for them, Virginia is the only place where I've observed what you're describing.
Yeah.
Because when I came up there and was fishing for snakeheads with you that first year, I even remember the moment where I was like, I have never seen a bowfin do that. That thing came from 10, 15 feet away. Yeah. Only time I've seen it. Now, I will say this. if you try to do that in 4 feet or more of water,
Mm,
it's not going to happen.
right.
In 1 feet of water, maybe, because I don't know if it's they're reacting to the vibration and the sound, and I
Mhm.
think that they can detect it across that lower
Mhm.
spectrum of water a little bit easier. But even one that passes over their head,
Mhm.
when you get to 4+ feet of water and some of those kind of pads, we have them on the Caloosahatchee River.
Mhm.
We'll have pads that are sitting in 5 feet of water. They just don't seem like they want to travel up that high to get something
Yeah, that
on
makes
a
sense.
if it's passing by quickly. If it's passing by in a foot of water above their head, sure, because they're not traveling far, that short range speed they
Yeah.
can utilize. But I feel like a popping frog might draw even
Mhm.
better numbers because you can pop, stop, pop, stop. And one thing I actually, I don't want to go off the topic of artificials here, but they're very investigative of noises and sounds and like just things happening on top of the water.
Right.
I really want to try this. I've never tried it, but it's something I'm like very interested in trying with bait is to use a popping cork, like what you do in
Yeah.
salt water.
Yeah.
I am convinced that I could utilize a popping cork in the same way with bait fishing. Pop, 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 sit, wait a few minutes, pop, pop, pop. But yeah, I think noise and vibration is one of
Mhm.
the key elements. Just to answer the person's question, scent is a big one. You may not get that as much
Mhm.
out of artificials. I mean, you can put artificial scent on there. You get salted baits, you get things like that. I think they like a salty bait, sure. It'll help in the event that they come up and they nose down,
Yeah.
start looking at. They're very investigative, and sometimes when they get to that point where they're you've probably seen this when you're even sight fishing for them, where their nose is on it, they're following
Yeah.
it, they're looking at it.
They just
But
need something to trigger them to
yeah,
eat. Yeah.
they're just suspicious enough, and it might be the unnatural smell.
Mhm.
Um,
I think
so
I think Grant has that happen a lot on the fly rod. You'll be
mm,
working it, and that fish follows, and it's on, and it's watching, but it just needs that little bit of something.
yeah,
And the fly dudes never use scent, so that fish could be there. Like, why doesn't this smell like food? It looks like food. Why doesn't it smell like food? And that could be the thing that keeps them from eating. It
yeah,
takes, I think, like all species, it takes a little bit of everything. You need a little scent, you need a little movement, vibration. You gotta make them feel. Both are predators, right? So they need to feel like they're being predatory. They need to feel like they have the upper hand on something. So if they feel like something isn't right, or your boat's hovering right over top of them, or you've made a lot of noise, if they don't feel like they're a lion or in the Sahara and they're stalking a gazelle, if they don't feel like they're on the ambush, I don't think you're going to have this much success getting them to hit. Just,
right.
I think all good points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and another funny observation I've had just sight fishing for them is a lot of times if you get the one that's curious but it doesn't want to commit to the bite, downsizing for whatever reason to a smaller lure, even with bigger fish, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
why. It seems like they'll be happier to take a smaller thing. I think it's like I don't know if they get intimidated by something this I don't know what they have to be scared of.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason I've noticed throwing bigger lures at them, sometimes if you just go down a little bit bigger,
Mm-hmm.
you'll draw the bite. But and then as far as like color, I don't know. I don't know necessarily know that I've observed them to be super crazy about. I know that bass can get that way, where it's like one color change will be the difference
Mm-hmm.
maker. I haven't seen that too much out of Bowfin. It's like because of the idea that maybe their vision is poor
Yeah.
in environments where the water's murkier. I'll use brighter. I use whites a lot. I use a
Yeah.
white in like chocolate conditions, and then I just
Mm-hmm.
use black or dark colors when the water is clear.
Yeah.
But I never get much more fancy than that. I wish I could say, oh, if you use uh
Yeah.
Christmas cider and this and I don't
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
know my fishing colors at that
Yeah.
point, but I don't think they're there. They're not. I don't think they're that crazy about the colors.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I replace your white with like bubble gum. I like pink for
Yeah,
some reason. I've had success with pink, but I think black with blue flake, green pumpkin, and then like some off color, like a white, something brighter. Chartreuse. Chartreuse is always good. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. But I think those are all solid points. Well, let's jump to the next one. What temperature do bowfin spawn? This is from Garrett Skolnick. He says, "What temperature do they spawn, and what temperature are they most active in?" And uh, Bobby Stair also kind of asked the same sort of question, like what are their seasonal patterns? So just kind of, I guess, take us from January 1 through December on the bowfin. What are they doing? Winter, spring, summer, fall. When are they spawning? Sort of give us a bowfin's
Sure.
year.
The thing with bowfin is they'll live their entire life in kind of a pretty close They're very much like Homer fish. They don't move all the way across the lake. They'll kind of pick one little area, one little feature, and stay most of the entire cycle in that one area. So again, especially with regards to the bigger fish, I've noticed this, especially with like the larger females, they want to be right on the edge of that deeper water. So they're not moving that far. It's like any other fish, though. In the wintertime, they'll be a little bit deeper water. So winter to early spring is when they start moving up into shallow waters. But there's to answer the question about when they spawn between like 60 and 65 degrees. That middle zone, low to mid 60s, is when they start getting ready to spawn. That's when you're going to start getting more opportunities, just from an angling standpoint, to find the males and the females in those shallow water areas for sight fishing opportunities. I think it, even like as the summer progresses, you'll still find a lot more of the smaller. I feel like you just find the smaller fish up on those shallow flats more often than not. The females will be on that, but they'll be on the area that's closer to the deeper water. They just like to be right on the margins and the edges of that. So wintertime, I'll look for deeper holes right on the edge, like right on the edge of a grass line, right on the edge of a grass flat, whether that's a natural like submerged creek channel, whether that is a dredged out area. Just to give an idea of an example of this real time where I've done it during different seasons. I talked about Lake Moultrie earlier. Lake Moultrie is, for the most part, that lake is a massive expansion of stumpy flats. The majority of the lake is no more than 5 feet deep. And it's a lot of stumps. So for the safety of boaters and anglers, there's a lot of man-made, dredged out, navigable channels. There's an area in Lake Moultrie, and this is a spot burn for anybody that lives in South Carolina. I'm going to tell you where to go. There's an area of Lake Moultrie they call the Hatchery. The Hatchery is a really popular bass fishing area. It's got all the dynamics of the grass, little grass margins, islands, pad fields, cypress trees, cypress knees, a lot of timber. But it's dangerous to go across this place because it's in a massive expansion of flats. Now you can go
stumps
a mile across these stumpy flats and get into a little pad field, and you'll find fish, but you won't find the big ones. But on the margins of this area, the hatchery area, there's like a dike, like a rocky dike, and along the edges of that, they bore out a navigable channel that's 15 feet deep, and that's what the boaters use to move along that. So as you move along this deep channel, there's these little openings on the lake side that open up through little islands. I guess when they were boring this out, you got to think they had to go somewhere with that dirt. They built little chain islands out of it. Between each island, there's a little gaps. A lot of the bass anglers will pull through those gaps, and it immediately goes from 15, 20 feet deep, immediately up to 2 to 3 feet deep.
Right.
And that's where you get through. So I would fish right for the bigger fish, right where those openings were. This is a good ambush point. This is a spot that offers the larger fish the opportunity to retreat down into deeper water, come up onto the flat, regulate their temperature without having to cover much ground. In the wintertime, again, they might move 50 yards at the most, 25 yards to get in that deeper water. They're right off the edge, like right off the edge of these things, and they're just sitting along a shelf, sitting in that deep water, and I found this out by bait fishing for them. And then in the spring, 25 yards away, they're right up on those flats. They don't have to cover any ground. They don't have to travel a great distance. They're staying near grass at all times. They're not having to swim across open water. They're just coming up an abrupt drop off and getting out onto that flat. And so in springtime, I'm like right there in those flats. In summer times, I don't know, it's kind of the same thing. I feel like the larger females will just hang right there near that deep water. And the males, I don't know, it's like the smaller fish, they'll open up and be out on those flats in the middle of the summer. Again, that is just a general rule of what might give you better chances, but
Mhm.
I'm not speaking in absolutes here. I found 31-inch fish that were nowhere near deep water at times, but it was more like on the occasion. It was
Mhm.
more like those 25-inch, 26-inch
Mhm.
little males chilling out. But the big females, they really like being on the edge of that deep water. So
Yeah.
winter, spring, and summer, they're all kind of in proximity to those holes.
I think I have a thought that I'm going to try to workshop real time here. I think the fish that live longer are also fish that get bigger. And I think over time they realize they have safety in that deeper water. So
Mhm.
that's why those older fish, you always find them in the deeper water. They've lived long enough to know there's less predatory birds that are going to take them out. They're not, there's they have that safety in deep water. So you're going to find more of those bigger fish in deep water because they've experienced more life than, say, a fish that's only 2, 3 years old. And on top of that, those bigger fish, that deep water's prime for their safety. So they're also going to be forcing out those smaller fish that they can bully. The
Yeah.
big deep water is the home of big fish, and everybody else just kind of has to deal with it. They get to
Yeah.
live up on the flat where they are prone to predation by
Yeah.
birds and other stuff.
And I want to make sure that this observation doesn't sound strictly anecdotal, like oh well, that works in South Carolina, but I live in this place. Okay, well, in Lake Moultrie, that's what I did. And another spot burn here for
Mm-hmm.
anybody living in the South. I don't live there anymore, so you can take my old spots.
Right.
There's a spot south of Lake Moultrie called the Goose Creek Reservoir in Creek, South Carolina, which is notorious. A lot of bowfin there, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
the same sort of setup. A lot of shallow water, very few deeper spots, but it's
Right.
the same thing too, where they bore out distinct channels. I don't know.
Right.
I think it was just a canal that they dammed up.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a historical, riverbed that they since flooded. So it's, the
Right.
margins are flats, and then there's one. But the Goose Creek Reservoir, there's like a north reservoir, and then there's a main south reservoir, and then there's a little narrow channel that connects the two. That's
Mm-hmm.
really deep. It's a really deep channel. Every winter, I mean, it was like my go-to spot. Middle of January, 40-degree temperatures, 30-degree temperatures. I'd be in jackets and beanies,
Yeah.
and the guys further up north, and like your Wisconsins and your whatever that are
Mm-hmm.
ice fishing for them, they're probably laughing. Well, anyway, that's cold for me, 40
It's
degrees.
relative. It's
But
relative.
they would be, again, these things would pile into this very narrow channel that was 15, 20 feet deep. They'd be right on the edge because
Yeah.
the edge was like a very abrupt drop off. Like you would think it was shallow water because it was, it was like cattails
Right.
along the margins. There was like a very distinct drop off, though. I mean, every winter I'd go out there, I'd anchor my boat directly in the center, and I would just line the shoreline. It's still like 10 feet of water,
Mm-hmm.
5 feet off the bank, and I just line it with baits, and we just nailing bowfin because they pile in there. Summertime, that wasn't working. It wasn't
Yeah.
happening. Springtime, they're up looking for spawning grounds, but
Mm-hmm.
wintertime, that's what you do. And I do the same thing here in Florida and Arkansas. I did that. But and
So,
a good observation too by you, just real quick. It is funny that you mentioned that the bigger fish seem a little bit less willing to share space
mm-hmm.
than the smaller ones are. I've been in areas where you find the little males, almost together.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, like when I go, especially as of late, when I've gone bowfin fishing, I'm having these one giant fish days.
Mm-hmm.
I'll commit to one spot where I know big fish might be. I'll get one, maybe two big monster females out of there. That's it. It's
Yeah.
like I feel like the big females don't. I don't know. I feel like they don't like to share space the same as like the little fish, the little males, even the little females seem a
Yeah.
little bit more willing to share that space.
Yeah. I feel like it's because they don't have a choice. They have to share it. They're getting bullied. But okay. So with that being said, would you say that? I mean, you said they don't move very far. Do you think that 13 and a half pounder that you just caught, or that other one you just mentioned, do you think that they're in that hole all the time? Like, because our buddy Andy up here, Andy Bagwell, he says back in one of these creeks, he saw a bowfin that could test the new state record. And it's always been in the back of my mind
Hmm.
that I need to go look for it. Do you think that fish, like, that's its area, or do you think they travel like great distances, or what is
I
your take
feel
on that?
I feel like that fish will probably at any point during whatever season be within 100 yards of that spot.
Okay.
I think they can retreat into this hole and come out of this hole whenever they want.
Right.
But it's just not a fish that I think is moving a lot of grounds. They're picking an area that has all the different elements that they like.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're cool with that, but they're migratory and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, no, they're I think they're big homers.
Yeah. It's kind of like a big buck that like it has its territory and it runs in its territory, and then another buck might run in this territory over here, but there's not a lot of overlap maybe.
Yeah.
But okay. Well, Michael Stroud from that same page had a couple questions that we already answered, I think. Where to find during winter, deep water, and then
deep water
right,
immediately close to shallow water.
right. And then it says, when I first set out actually fishing for bowfin, most things you read say they like the nastiest shallows they can find. I have found this is not true at all, and they've touched on all this. It's you're looking for that piece of water that's dynamic. You want shallow water with cover right next to deep water with safety. I think that pretty much is the idea. I think we've sort of touched that pretty thoroughly at this point. You want the area where they can ambush and then go rest.
I'll expand a little on where I think they're getting at, because people say nasty water. So like a bowfin, like that's another misconception. They don't want dirty, disgusting water. Even a swamp is clean water. The blackest water that you get, if you dip a glass into it and lift it up, it's crystal clear.
The swamp is the cleanest water you can probably get.
It's
getting filtered the most. It just has a lot of tannins in it that changes the color of it.
I disagree with the notion that they prefer those kind of environments. So I think where I'm going with this, and hopefully if it's not, I'm answering some other people's questions.
Okay.
I don't think it's so much that they prefer that oxygen depleted water as it is that they have a much bigger competitive advantage there than other fish. So if they occupy an area like that, or they find themselves in an area like that doesn't have an avenue for escape, or even if it does have an avenue of escape, they just have a competitive and tactical advantage over something like a largemouth bass. So like they're not going to be competing for resources. So they have more of an opportunity to proliferate in that environment unchallenged. Sure. But I don't believe that they would choose that over another area. I'm not sure. I think that's an area where you'll find, if you can find that on a map, a swamp, like an oxbow lake, something that's cut off from an oxygen source that's gone almost borderline eutrophic, and it's got like high density vegetation, no flow, no oxygen. You will find a lot of uncontested fish there. You're not going to find the big ones. You're not going to find the quality of fish, especially if that area is always like that. You're going to get a genetic strain that's weaker. You're going to get small fish that are able to reach sexual maturity unchallenged, and they're reproducing easier, so they're passing weaker genetics. But I will find them in, like here in Florida, we have a lot of natural springs. This is the highest, most oxygenated, coldest water, crystal clear water. They are loaded with bowfin. All of the springs. The bowfin love the springs. They love that environment. So it's not that they want that. It's just that if they're thrust into that, they're going to outcompete everything else. I mean, they're just going to have a much bigger advantage over other fish there.
So it's not necessarily that there's more bowfin there. There's just less of everything else. So
yeah, well, there's even more of them. Like I said, it's just like they're existing unchallenged. They're not getting picked off by other things. They're not competing for resources. So I will always urge people who message me and say, I want to catch, my first bowfin. I will normally be like, all right, well, where do you live? And I'll look at their areas, and I will specifically look for that type of environment first. So if you want to have a day where you can catch 20, I've caught as many as 43 bowfin in a day. That's my personal best.
That's ridiculous.
43. None of them were big.
Yeah.
All of them are small because I was in that type of place. That's cool and all, but if it gets to a point where you want bigger fish, it's like anything else. It's like with largemouth bass. It's like with anywhere else. You need a much more balanced and healthy environment where there's competitors. There's a greater resources of food. There's different types of food. You will
Competition.
catch less fish, but you'll get the big ones.
Yeah, that competition weeds out the weaker of the species. That goes for anything, not just bowfin. So it's a good point. It's a lot of good things to sort of work over in your brain there. But
No.
yeah, I co-sign on all that. I think the areas in which there were the most competition between species, largemouth, snakehead, gar, stuff like that. That's where we're finding the largest bowfin. You go back in the back of one of these, creeks, Chickahominy, where it's only bowfin or like small grass pickerel and stuff. You're not finding 15 pounders.
Yeah.
So
well, I'll say this: if I'm going to go blind casting lures for bowfin, that's the kind of environment that I will go to. And we get a lot of that in the Everglades because there's so many flood control measures in the Everglades. There's pump stations, there's pump houses, there's like diversion, there's little lakes that are literally just by design, like they're just there to hold water. So you get a lot of these grassy, shallow, low oxygenated bodies of water, and the bowfin can proliferate in them. And and they're more likely to be in there, and you're not going to get the bycatch of, like, if you're slinging lures, you're not dealing with bass, you're not dealing with whatever else might grab the lures. You but got a better chance of coming across a bowfin. But
right,
and that's why normally when I fish these bigger rivers and stuff, I'm not lure fish. I didn't like doing what I did. I got lucky with that one the other day because that was a healthy area. It was right off of a main river. But anyway, yeah. To answer that question though, they don't. I don't think it's that they prefer that. You're more likely to get more fish in those environments just by way of natural selection and the environment. If a bass has a choice to sit there in low oxygenated water with limited types of food sources, and then there's a channel out of there, you'll still get them in there, but they're really going to move out of there if they have to.
Right. I hear you. All right. Well, I have one more question from our buddy Steve Carroll. And that'll be the end of our question segment. So if you want to participate in future podcasts, look for these posts on the HRWT Studios Facebook page and comment and give us stuff to talk about. But Steve writes in, how do bowfin fight compared to, say, a smallmouth bass? Do they jump like a trout or roll up your line like a catfish? So we don't have to get super complicated with it. Just give the vibe.
You could probably expand on this better than me. The funny thing is I haven't caught a lot of smallmouth, but I've caught them in several different areas. Gosh, what was I caught them in the Lower Mountain Fork in Oklahoma. I've caught them in the Buffalo River in Northwest Arkansas, and I've caught them in like the Neosho River in Missouri. But it's just, I think it's apples to oranges. It's just two different kinds of fish. One's a river, like primarily a river dwelling fish. I mean, I think when you talk maybe stamina, certainly like athleticism and like power and like sustained pulls of drag, probably that probably favors the smallmouth bass. Because I mean, you think about a fish that's living its life in current. I mean, it's like they're at the gym 24 hours a day. They're like athletes, whereas a bowfin is like a cage fighter. It's trying to use the elements against you. They're trying to get you into the weeds, get you into the snags, twist, turn, shake, move, maneuver. So I think I would say this of the smallmouth I've caught, because this is a big debate. People say smallmouth are the hardest fighters. It depends on what your idea of hard fighting is.
Yeah.
I think a bowfin is a much more dynamic fighter, and that I think that they bring more like methods to the table.
Yeah.
But if you tied a smallmouth and a bowfin tail to tail of equal size, a bowfin is probably going to shake the smallmouth like crazy, but I think maybe sustained power might favor the smallmouth. I'm more interested in your thoughts on that. You've caught big ones. You've caught them in lakes, rivers.
Yeah. So I have a couple different. We'll sort of encompass all of this. I said this on that podcast. We're on bowfin a lot lately for some reason. I was filming with Grant the other day, and we had this type of conversation. I used this analogy. The fight of a bowfin and trying to land a bowfin is like trying to get an angry, wet house cat in a garbage bag. It's just violence. It's all over you're not going to have a bowfin like take all your line. He's not going to peel.
You can't, because of the environment you're fishing for them in.
Right.
It's so close quartered. It's a lot of times I catch even the biggest ones in 30 seconds. It's
Right.
over.
Right. But you're not, that fish isn't going to spool you. But what it might do is break all your shit. Might break your rod, might break,
Yeah.
they're violent, and they're violent in a confined area. So like you're reeling, you set the hook on a bowfin, he's immediately shaking and I mean, I've had bowfins unfortunately break their own jaw from their simple like thrashing and going crazy. So the fight is really, it's not like a smallmouth where it's diving down and trying to get down to the bottom, or tail walking, and it's not. I'd say they're probably closer to a catfish as far as the rolling goes, because blue cats, when we catch them here, they like to roll up your line and get everything slimed up. They're probably closer to that, but they're much more violent. A bowfin is just, it's like hooking the Tasmanian devil. Everything's fine. You set into him, and then he just explodes, and he's expelling every ounce of energy he has in like a 5-foot radius. He's trying to get away, rolling, going crazy, jumping. I mean, it's literally like trying to get an angry cat into a cat carrier. The thing's pissed off, and it's letting you know it. And then even when you get it into the boat, it's the same way. Everything's cool, but then you have that bony tail breaking everything in the boat, all your gear. I mean, they're just a summarization of bowfin in one word is just violence. It's just, that's what it is. They're violent, and they don't like anything to do with trying to be caught. So
yeah. So I guess it's people's idea of what is a hard fight. It's if I got into, like, let's say a human fight with a guy that had one overwhelmingly powerful fist I had to worry about, I would almost favor going against a guy with a horrific, not like a blow that if it hits me, I'm dead. Than somebody that's throwing knees, kicks, elbows, takedowns, headbutts, hitting me with every angle. That's a more delicate fight. It's a more dangerous fight, but I don't know. It's it's just different. It's way different.
Brock Lesnar versus Conor McGregor. Yeah. Like you know.
Somebody asked, do they jump? I've absolutely had bowfin jump, tail walk. The thing is, like, there's such a high risk of losing them because their mouth is not like they do roll like a catfish, but a catfish's mouth is so like fat and thick. The hook is not. The hook's not. When the hook's in there, they're pinned. Yeah. A bowfin has such a hard mouth that when they start throwing the twist, turn, shakes, and like they don't just roll like you've seen them. It is like what they call death roll. Like, it is blinding speed that they do that, and it's so like the hook has so many opportunities to just come out. So it's just different, man. I don't know. I can't compare the two. I think they're both are really hard fighting, awesome fish. Yeah, but it's just two different styles. And one of them's pure chaos. The other one's more. Yeah, you're fighting. You're never going to be fighting a bowfin in open water. You're fighting them hard to get them away from the weed line, the limbs, the this and that. So it's like, by default, you hardly even get to enjoy the fight, because if you're sitting there trying to like hear drag running and stuff like that, you're just kind of asking.
Yeah, it's nothing like that. It's just immediate 10 out of 10, like throwing down, and then it's over with. That's pretty much what it is. But it's a lot of good points. It's hard to. I mean, you can compare apples to apples on some things, but just bowfin are just their own angry little animal that they like being the predator. So when you get them in a situation where they're down, they're using every ounce of energy to get out of that.
I think if you have those debates over which fight's harder, like the battleground has, like, you got to be fighting on even ground. You know what I mean? Like if you took a smallmouth bass and a trout, or like two river dwelling fish, or you took a northern snakehead and a bowfin that you might catch in 2 subsequent casts, you really get that measuring point. But that's like saying, does a blue marlin fight harder than I don't know, some inshore species? It's just it's just different.
Yeah, but cool. All right, well, I think that wraps up the bowfin stuff. Do you have anything you want to sort of bookend that section of stuff with? I mean,
not really. I mean, the bowfin thing's one of those things that, I mean, we could get more in like the technical game of finding them and things like that. But those questions are all good questions. I just like to see more people like actively like engaged and wanting to learn more about these fish nowadays. It's like so awesome, like the culture of that fishing groups specifically for bowfin is like growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
But it's also a dangerous thing because like the interest is real high right now, but the field is small as far as people that are doing it. It's real easy for you to walk in there in this open area and like stake your flag and say, I know the most.
Yeah.
So it's
Sure.
still hard for people to find the good information, but
we're getting to a point with like, I know a lot of fly anglers are like getting more into that like exotic scene with our native species. So you have more guys gar fishing, you have more guys bowfin fishing, stuff like that with the fly rod. I think that's transferring into, the scape overall. Plus, you have social media and they look cool. So, I mean, these are the type of scenarios where social media help versus hurt. Normally we're talking about how social media is hurting fishing and hurting fishing spots and all this stuff. Getting eyes on the species, and it helps educate, it helps people care more. Like just recently, I think the start of the year, Virginia has put in new bow fishing laws for gar and bowfin for our native species. So now I don't know the exact like language for it, but instead of it being X amount per day, it's X amount per day. So it's way less that you're allowed to kill per day, which is great because up here bowfin are competing with snakehead and blue cat, and they're getting on slings and arrows from every corner of the arena. So it's good that bowfin they're getting that protection legally from state agencies, and they're getting popularized by your fly guys, by your social media influencers, by all. So it's getting to the point where they're getting on par with some of these more common game fish species. I mean, most of the time you're not eating largemouth bass, and that's what kind of makes it a game fish. So it's getting more up in there with the sport fish stuff. People are spending more money and they want to release them so they can catch them again. And it's kind of happening across the board with a lot of these native species, I think.
Yeah.
So
well, it's funny, but just I don't know, that whole idea of classifying things by game fish, non-game fish is funny to me. If you look at the definition of game fish, it says nothing about like in order to meet this criteria, there's got to be a quality of what it is on a table.
Yeah.
Gameness, even like in dog fighting, a dog is considered game based on its drive to fight, on its drive to compete. That's called, that dog's got a lot of game. It's got gameness. So it's like it has nothing to do with what the fish looks like or how palatable it is.
Yeah.
So I mean,
you're talking about actual dog fighting. Like,
yes.
Oh my god,
dog fighting, like
dog dark so quickly.
When that's what, well, that's the thing. When I think, because they say a dog is very game. A dog is a game. It's a game bred animal.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Game cocks, like cockfighting.
Yeah. Okay.
Game,
okay.
anyway.
Okay. I'm understanding.
That's what gameness is when it comes to like fighting animals. So
a
game fish is a fish that's something you can compete against and wants to fight. At least that's my idea of it.
Yeah.
So if you go on that criteria, the funny thing is, and I say this anytime I talk about bowfin, it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, who you talk to, the people that hate them the most, everybody will agree that yes, they do fight hard. Or there's always that but fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I hate them. They stink. They take over. They're invasive. Like a lot of myths, a lot of wrong things, but they do fight hard. Seems to be a common denominator that people like, that's irrefutable. And anybody that's encountered one has no, like, there's nothing else that you can do but slump back in your chair or whatever and admit, like, okay, I get it now. Like, and I feel like that's the impression that everybody that's come across one of these, especially now, like to your point, the social media thing, you don't have, prior to that, it was like everybody got their information from the grandpa.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more like grandfathered in beliefs about everything. But now it's like, I don't know, you can quickly dispel old myths like that. And man, anybody that comes across them's like, holy crap, I get it.
Yeah. And I think too, like fishing has exploded in the past couple of years just online. So more people are looking for their little niche thing that they can get into that other people aren't getting into. So, more of these like kind of random species in the grand scheme of things are going to get more play eventually. But I don't know. It's good stuff, dude. I mean, anytime you can promote something that, I mean, that fish is older than the human race on this continent for sure. So it's anytime you can be a champion for that species and see that they have longevity is good. So, but I think what we'll do, finishing out the podcast, since we talked about our topic for today, we'll kind of give a little background on ourselves, and then we can kind of end it there. But that'll sort of give people an idea who we are, just in case this is the first thing they're ever hearing from either one of us. They found us randomly on Spotify or whatever. Just tell us. You already went through the moving and stuff. Just kind of give us the overall of who David Graham is. What's your fishing like? What's your life like? Where are you at? Just give us give us the synapse of like who you are.
Oh man, I don't know how to make this sound, super exciting. I mean, I think I'm like everybody else that's probably listening. I'm a guy that's eager to learn, but I'm also a guy that's eager to like share what I know.
Right.
And I think it's better if we're in that frame of mind where we're wanting to share. And like, I got real excited about social media when it first came along as an opportunity to like share the things I was interested in. But you're getting now into this world where something like an Instagram is people's personal highlight reels, and everybody's willing to, I don't know, like everybody's willing to put things out there to receive attention, but not as much willing to give information.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So,
yeah.
That's really where I'm at now. I've enjoyed fishing for kinds of fish that most people haven't in the past gone after. And I did it during a time, my interest in a lot of these fish came when there was very limited resources to find information about them.
Right.
And I recall the days of just trial and erroring everything.
Right.
And so now it's like, well, that's cool. I feel like if there's anything that I know that somebody else might not know, like it's our responsibility of stewards of the sport to continue that progression, to like share information, share what we're passionate about, help other people. When somebody opens that door and says, hey, how'd you do that? Or, they might say, where'd you catch it at? It's easy to want to like keep that information to ourselves.
Yeah.
And be like, you're trying to take what I know. That's not what this is supposed to be about. For the sake of a fish like a bowfin, for example, or fill in the blank with fish that need that kind of positive attention. Like when somebody lends you their ear and like is waiting for you to give them the information, and you have that, you need to give it to them. So I think for me, I know that now you and I teaming up's been awesome because you've got a lot of strengths in areas that I'm weak with, the videography, the visual, the conceptualizing things, sharpening an idea and making an idea become an actual product. It's like we're getting to a point now where text and like filling something out in a forum or writing a blog is getting past that. People want to hear their information. They want to see their information. So it's, I think we're getting to a point now where I'm eager to continue to share the information and share what I'm passionate about and help other people do it. But I now know that using a format like this with the spoken word is going to become more and more invaluable. Videos, things like that. And I'm going to continue to write about it. But man, I just like every time there's nothing makes me feel better than when somebody reaches out to me on the side and asks about something like a bowfin. And I tell them, somebody might say, hey, I'm going to be in South Carolina next month. I saw that you caught some fish there. I will send them sometimes to exact locations and tell them, here's how you do it.
Yeah.
Follow this pattern. It's going to work for you. And then months later, they follow back up and send me pictures of them holding one. Like that makes me feel good. Like that's somebody like that. You have planted the seed in their head. They're going to take that ball and run with it. And they're going to create, they're going to continue to spread those.
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying seeds, but like they're going to continue to put that interest out there. And that's what we need to be doing.
You're ensuring the sport survives another generation and more people are getting enthused about the thing.
Yeah. And stomping out the trash fish dumpster fire that has spread.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point, man. I mean, we've started 4 podcasts now, the website, the Facebook page, all the stuff to try to encapsulate that idea of promoting fisheries, promoting the conservation of species, promoting fishing in general. And we just happen to be a couple of guys that have invested a lot of time, money, and effort into it. And I mean, you've caught a bunch of giant fish, everything from alligator gar to Goliath grouper to these bowfin. And I'm sure eventually, like, the sky's the limit with everything that we're doing. So, by promoting these things, we're not saying that we're the trusted resource in it. I mean, I know you have probably 25 years experience ish in the fishing world, something like that. I probably have 20 myself. I mean, we got records between us. We've got plenty of catches. I mean, we've done the things to put weight behind who we are as anglers and give you reasons to listen and trust in what we say. So, and I think we're both pretty solid persons, and we like talking to people and helping others out. So that's just kind of what this is. This is going to be a podcast, us getting on here, talking about fishing, answering your questions. And the same with the havrodswilltravel.com website. Articles, videos, podcasts, plenty of information on there for you. Check out our other podcasts. David does one titled Boundless Pursuit, where he interviews unique individuals with unique stories.
That's been fun.
Yeah, whether it's fishermen or people, just a crazy life story. I mean, I've heard some of it so far, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest.
Right.
So it's good stuff. And then I do this podcast with you. I have a podcast I do myself titled Species Specific, where we kind of do what we just did here. We pick an individual species and we talk about how to catch a trophy in that species, what you got to do to find that upper echelon fish. And then the last podcast is the Peeling Drag podcast that Grant and I started what feels like 10 years ago, and we kind of gave it up, and we're back doing it again. It's just he and I kind of doing something like this, talking about our fishing and fishing stories, and just kind of our life and fishing in general. So we have a lot of good stuff to offer, and we hope you guys tune in and listen to us, and we hope you enjoy it. Check out the HRWT Studios Facebook page to find the rest of the podcast and stuff lined up. But yeah, we're just a couple of guys that are really passionate about what we do, and put a lot of effort into it. And we hope you have enjoyed this episode, and we'll subscribe and give us 5 stars or whatever you got to do to get us at the top of the board so we can keep going. But that's pretty much all I got. David, how about you?
Yeah, no, and I really like the questions that came from people. That's always fun. It's good to feed off of people's genuine interest instead of just getting onto here and throwing information out into the dark to anyone that may be passing by and listening. I'll say this though, if somebody asked me, I've caught a few snook, and I've caught a few little tarpon, and I've caught a few different kinds of fish, but if my experience is limited and I don't know, I'm not going to pretend to be a subject matter expert of anything that I have only a small amount of experience with. But, as far as bowfin go, sure. I've been doing that for a very long time in a lot of different states in a lot of different ways. So I'm very eager to share information. So if there's anything that wasn't answered on here, people want to reach out.
Yeah,
I can answer via email, via Instagram, via whatever. I feel like I've always been the kind of guy I normally get back to people quick and give a good detailed answers. But you start asking me about like the smallmouth thing, I'm very quick to defer to you. I've caught some, but I just don't have enough personal experience with them to give a very detailed, accurate representation of the fish.
I hear you.
I'm not a salesman.
Yeah. We're not going to get on here and start telling you about bluefin tuna. We don't have enough money. Even if we pooled our resources to even go out and try that. But everything else, we got a pretty solid handle on it. So we hope you enjoy listening to us. We hope you enjoy this program. I'm in Virginia. David's down in Florida. It looks like it's starting to get dark on you. So maybe we ought to wrap this thing up.
Yeah, I'm on my porch.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on all the socials and stuff. And appreciate you guys spending a little time with us.
All right. Let's do it again.
All right. See you later.